So one of the ways we used to work through this, and we still do to a degree, is when were working through cases of POTS, we would progressively move people from where they could maintain their blood flow, look at where it breaks. So we put them on tilt tables, see where that starts to break, and then take them just below that and actually do work at that range, and then try to move them up bit by bit. We've gotten a little more nuanced in that since then, but I think that's a useful idea that people can even start to maybe entertain at home, is like figure out where's my breaking point in terms of even just like at what level of elevation, and then be able to start there and say, what can I do here? So for example, we exercise people laying down, and then we modify that tilt and then work toward getting them up to recumbent and then eventually to standing as a mechanism for being able to just like gradually move the brain and to be able to understanding where it's at. But it's one thing that can be really helpful in pairing position to stimulus. So we know what stimulus we want to apply. We're going to use the position that they are still able to perfuse their brain, so that we're able to maximally start to move both up together. And that can be one way to think about it. Okay. Dr. Ginia wants to know if she should sleep on a wedge pillow to assist in venous drainage for vascular TOS. A wedge pillow can be useful. And same thing we're talking about earlier. Professor MJ was talking about his son and being able to be on an angle. We know the angle helps. We don't know why for sure, but we know that we like it. And this is a case where we're saying, if we've got a vascular or thoracic outlet where we're perhaps causing a difficulty in the drainage of venous blood draining out of the head and back into the thoracic cavity, sometimes positioning of your head while you're sleeping, everybody's got like a favorite awesome sleeping position, but sometimes that can get impaired, and you'll notice that because you'll wake up feeling not good, or you'll be kind of tossing and turning around all night, or you might feel a little bit dizzy in the morning and stuff like that. For some people, if that thoracic outlet is a component, being able to sleep in a way where you're opening this up, this space between the clavicle and the first rib, allowing that shoulder to rotate back a little bit without compressing, and allowing your neck to have open space to let that drain, can actually be really useful in allowing that system to drain overnight. And we may find that just your favorite way of sleeping from when you were a kid isn't compatible with whatever injury or lifestyle event happened that changed the output, and then we start to compress it, and it can be problematic. And you see a lot of this, especially with people with head injuries, where they're used to sleeping on their stomach. You know who you are. So if you're sleeping on your stomach, but you're used to like kind of doing one of these numbers, like you might not be able to hear me, where you're cocked to the side, but then you also had a head injury where you took one of those, you might find that all of a sudden, as part of that, when you sleep like this, you wake up and like your eyes are blurry, or you're like trying to crack your neck, or you're not moving around a lot, or I'm feeling dizzy. Might be indicators that even though that is like your favorite way to sleep, it might not be the most optimal way to sleep. And like Dr. Jeannie is talking about, using the wedge can be helpful for some people, because it can kind of force you, lets gravity kind of do some of the work for you. The one thing I would know is some people have a hard time when they start to tuck their chin back like that. It can be obstructive. So being able to still have your head in a neutral position, but on a wedge, if you can tolerate that and you can sleep, can be a good trick. With sun exposure being beneficial, how much time in the sun would one need to reap the benefits if you're dark skinned? It's not a perfect analogy, but you can kind of think of like the level of melanin in your skin, or like the darkness of your skin is dynamic, and it changes relative to the amount of UV radiation that you're acquiring. So what's really cool, every cell's got a nucleus that has its DNA in it. And we know that radiation can affect the DNA, cause mutations which aren't good. But your body already knows this, which is pretty awesome. And what it will do is when the UV index starts to go up, we're getting more UV exposure, then we will see the skin respond by putting more melanin in the outer layer of the skin. And you can think about that as like, obviously the melanin's pigmented, so the darker the pigment, the more it's going to absorb. Just the same way, like when you look at your pupil, you want the light to be absorbed into that little black part there, because that's where it's going to go be processed. But then you think about this white part on the outside, that's not really processing the light so much, and that's white, so it's going to be a little bit more reflective. So we will use that melanin as a way to be able to almost make ourselves little solar panels so we can absorb the sunlight, put it to work. But then also it allows us to be able, as it's absorbing it at this layer, let's say, so the sun's coming in, it's absorbing it here, but it's also creating shade for that nuclear part of the cell on the inside that doesn't necessarily need that penetration of the sun, especially the UV radiation. Now, where it may account for more of that red light moving through the system, which is pretty cool how that works. So your question is, how much do you need? And then if you're darker skin. So generally speaking, if you've got darker skin, you actually need to have more input of the sun to be able to get to the same dose because it's being absorbed. Now, there are some simple rule of thumbs, but it's kind of the heuristics of that are like the darker your skin, the more the better, and you kind of build up a callus to it. There are people that talk about this at large, and kind of the more of a solar callus you're able to develop, the more you can be in the sun and to be able to tolerate that. Now, the minimum dose would be, thinking about it in 3 waves. You'd think about like sunlight without UV and sunlight with UV, and we kind of want to maximize the sunlight without UV exposure early in the day because it primes the skin to be able to tolerate the UV in the middle of the day. We need a smaller dose of that, so most people can get away with 20-ish minutes as a minimum and the UV exposure during the summertime. And then once the sun starts to go down, the UV exposure is down, then being able to maximize the kind of the more red light exposure on the back end of the day. Most of you have seen like red lights are wildly popular. We use them in the clinic, but they're meant to mimic that time frame from our red sun where we're outside of the UV exposure and we're trying to stimulate that red light within the system. The sun's red light is better. It's denser, it's more full spectrum, it's kind of more what we're built to tolerate. And then adding in the dose of UV in the midday helps with circadian rhythms, but it also helps to give us that exposure of the full spectrum of the sun. So I think it's a really good question, actually. I think we can talk a lot about more. There's some really good resources online, people that know a lot more about it than I do. But the way I usually recommend it is as much as you can while it's red light, work up to 20-30 minutes or more, depending on your tolerance as you go during the peak daylight hours. And then once that sun starts to go down, kind of absorbing that red light again. The good news is when the UV is not there, you're not going to get burned. So you can tolerate it more even if you're of a very pale skin, which a lot of POTS folks are because they don't get to spend a lot of time outside. They don't do well in the heat. And that can be a good way to start to get some gentle exposure as you're moving along. So great question. Thanks for asking that, Rob.